The time is 6:47 in the morning. The date, the 6th of June, 1944. Inside the suffocating confines of the USS Harder's conning tower, Commander Samuel Dealey presses his eyes to the periscope. Through the lens, a moonlit sea, and cutting through it, three shadows. Three Japanese destroyers, moving with the lethal grace of sharks that have scented blood. His blood. At 37 years old, Dealey was a veteran of 5 war patrols, a phantom of the deep who had already sent 18 enemy ships to the bottom. But this was different. The Imperial Japanese Navy had dispatched the destroyers Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanakaze for a singular purpose: to find and kill the American submarine that had been savaging their fleet for weeks. Until this year, the rules of engagement were brutally simple. A destroyer could slice through the waves at 35 knots. A submerged submarine, if pushed to its absolute limit, might struggle to make 9. They were the wolves of the sea, and submarines were their prey. Between December of 1941 and March of 1944, Japanese destroyers had hunted down and sunk 14 American submarines. In that same period, not a single American submarine had managed to sink a Japanese destroyer in a direct, head-to-head fight. It was considered suicide. Commander Dealey had personally torn that rulebook to shreds. On the 13th of April, the destroyer Ikazuchi had charged his position, its bow wave churning white with killing intent. Every officer on the Harder's bridge expected the order to dive, to run for the cold, dark depths. Instead, Dealey gave an order that bordered on madness: flank speed, ahead, directly into the path of the charging warship. At a distance of just 900 yards, the Harder fired a spread of 4 torpedoes. 2 found their mark. The Ikazuchi erupted in a flash of fire and steel, vanishing beneath the waves in less than 5 minutes. Dealey's report, transmitted across the Pacific, became legend. Expended 4 torpedoes and 1 Jap destroyer. Admiral Suemu Toyoda, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, was not amused. Between January and May alone, Japan had lost 23 destroyers, many to a new breed of aggressive Americans at the Tawi-Tawi anchorage, the centerpiece of Operation Ago, a plan to annihilate the American Navy. 4 battleships, including the behemoth Yamato, 9 carriers, 15 cruisers, 28 destroyers, the greatest concentration of Japanese naval might since Midway. And a lone American submarine was threatening to unravel it all before it even began. American codebreakers knew the fleet was gathering. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Force, sent the Harder, his most audacious skipper, to watch. For 9 days, Dealey operated as a ghost, a whisper in the deep. Then, at 3 in the morning on June 6th, a momentary lapse. A Japanese patrol plane spotted the faint feather of his periscope wake, 15 miles from the anchorage. The trap was sprung. Now, 3 destroyers were executing a perfect, coordinated hunt. Dealey watched the lead ship, Minazuki. 1,250 tons of gray steel, armed with 4 5-inch guns, closing fast. It zigzagged, a textbook maneuver to evade torpedoes. Behind it, the other 2 warships fanned out, sealing the exits, methodically shrinking the box of water in which the Harder could breathe. The established doctrine screamed for him to dive deep, to pray for a thermal layer to hide him from the searching sonar. But Samuel Dealey had already written his own doctrine, in fire and water. He gave the orders. The Harder did not dive. It turned, it aimed, it fired. The Minazuki, the lead hunter, never knew what hit it. It sank, taking almost its entire crew with it. The remaining two destroyers descended into a frenzy, dropping depth charges, scouring the sea. But Dealey slipped away. The hunted had become the hunter once more. The next day he found the Hayanami and sent it to the bottom. 2 days after that, he stalked, engaged, and sank the third and final ship sent to kill him, the Tanikaze. In 72 hours, one man in one submarine had single-handedly broken the back of the Tawi-Tawi destroyer screen. He had not merely survived an encounter that should have been a death sentence. He had turned the very nature of the hunt on its head, proving that the deadliest thing in the ocean was not the size of the ship, but the will of the commander inside it. The steel predator aligns its bow, a silent challenge issued across the deep. The target, the Japanese destroyer Minazuki. The distance is 1,100 yards. A chasm of dark water separates hunter from prey. Inside the conning tower of the USS Harder, the air is thick with unspoken tension. Every man understands the maneuver they are about to attempt. It has a name whispered with a mix of reverence and dread. Down the throat. A shot of pure, calculated audacity. You don't fire at the enemy's flank. You don't seek a safe angle. You fire your torpedoes directly into the teeth of the attacking warship, straight down its throat. Then you dive. Dive deep and fast, praying you clear its keel. It is a deadly gambit. If the torpedoes miss their mark, the destroyer is already in the perfect position to unleash a hellstorm of depth charges. Dive a second too late, and its reinforced bow will slice through. At 750 yards, Commander Samuel Dealey makes the call. 3 torpedoes are away, carving invisible paths through the water. The command rings out. "Kick her down! 300 feet!" The Harder's bow plunges, the deck tilting at a sickening 30-degree angle. The submarine is a falling stone. 40 seconds later, the first concussion hits. An immense bone-jarring shockwave that throws men against bulkheads and shatters light fixtures, plunging the control room into flickering chaos. They turn a full 6 feet out of the water before slamming it back down with brutal finality. Dealey brings his boat back to periscope depth. Where the Minazuki had been charging moments before, there is only wreckage. A slick of black oil spreads across the waves, a stain on the sea. The destroyer, broken in half by the force of the blasts, is already beginning its final descent into the abyss. On the horizon, the other 2 Japanese destroyers are in full retreat, scattering depth charges at random, firing wildly into the empty ocean. They are not hunting, they are fleeing. By 900 hours, the news reaches Admiral Toyota. A single American submarine has slipped through his screen and eviscerated one of his destroyers. The response is not just military, it is a furious, sweeping dragnet. He orders 6 more destroyers to the area with a single, chilling directive: find and kill that submarine. By noon, the sky above is a grid of search patterns, with Japanese patrol planes scouring the surface every 20 minutes. The sea itself has become a cage. But Samuel Dealey is not done hunting. June 7th, 02:30 in the morning. The Harder breaks the surface, a black shape in an even blacker world. No moon, a heavy blanket of clouds. The submarine's diesel engines thrum to life, recharging the batteries that are its lifeblood when submerged. The conditions are perfect for a ghost. At 3:12, a faint ping appears on the radar screen. A single ship, bearing 095, range 8,000 yards, and it is closing fast. The contact is moving at 28 knots. There is no doubt, another destroyer. The IJN Hayanami, a 1,700-ton warship, has been searching for the American Phantom since 1 o'clock in the morning. Her captain, Commander Hideyoku Boke, is exhausted. His orders are to return to base at 300 hours. In the final moments of his patrol, his guard is down. No one on his bridge truly expects an American submarine to have the sheer nerve to attack on the surface at night. It is unthinkable. Dealey orders flank speed. The Harder's diesels roar, pushing the submarine to a remarkable 21 knots. He is not running. He is closing the distance, deliberately slipping inside the destroyer's effective radar range before his own larger profile can be properly identified. At 4,000 yards, the Hayanami's radar operator notes the contact. Small, moving quickly. He dismisses it. Probably another friendly destroyer returning to base. A fatal assumption. At 3,000 yards, Commander Boak understands his catastrophic error. An American submarine racing towards... But it is far too late. At a range of just 2,300 yards, Dealey fires a spread of 4 torpedoes. 2 of them strike the Hayanami's starboard side, directly below the aft magazine. The resulting explosion is apocalyptic. The entire stern of the destroyer is torn from its hull in a single, violent cataclysm. The ship rolls 90 degrees onto its side, a dying beast. Its massive propellers, still spinning at full power, lift clear of the water, chewing uselessly at the night air as the vessel goes under, stern first. Commander Boak and 147 of his sailors are gone. Dealey submerges instantly. The sky will be filled with vengeful aircraft within minutes. 2 destroyers in less than 24 hours. The lone wolf has drawn the attention of the entire pack. The Imperial Japanese Navy is now hunting the USS Harder with everything it has. And deep beneath the waves, the silent predator waits, ready to turn the hunter into the hunted once more. A cold fury was brewing in the heart of the Imperial Japanese Navy, an admiral's rage, sharp and absolute. His name was Toyota, and his protected waters, the strategic anchorage of Tawi-Tawi, had been violated. 2 destroyers, lost in 2 days. Not to a fleet, not to a carrier strike, but to a single, unseen enemy. A ghost beneath the waves. The response was swift, born of fury and necessity. 8 destroyers were pulled from vital convoy escort duty. Their new designation, hunter-killer groups. Their mission, a singular obsession burned into the mind of every captain. Find the American submarine and send it to the bottom. The orders left no room for interpretation. Maximum aggression, no retreat. On the 8th of June, Commander Samuel Dealey pointed the bow of the USS Harder south, toward the Subutu Passage, a narrow strait, a liquid choke point between Tawi-Tawi and Borneo. It was a gauntlet, patrolled relentlessly by the very ships now hunting him. But Dealey was not running. He was turning the hunt back on the hunters. He wanted to see just how many he could take down before they understood the deadly game he was playing. At 1400 hours, a sliver of steel broke the horizon. Then another. 2 Japanese destroyers, steaming in formation, carving through the sea at 25 knots. Their movements were a precise, mechanical dance, a standard search pattern. For 90 minutes, Dealey watched, a silent observer from another world. He saw the rhythm in their chaos, the predictability in the opportunity. Perhaps 30 seconds after each turn to set up a perfect shot, he positioned the Harder directly in their path, a steel predator lying in ambush. And he waited. At 16:30, the lead destroyer, the Tanakaze, turned. A fatal, final turn, directly toward the Harder's position. The range began to close. 3,000 yards. Dealey let her come. 2,500 yards. The silence in the conning tower was absolute. 2,000. The crew, a single, focused organism, waiting for the command. 1,500. At 1,200 yards, Dealey spoke the words. 4 torpedoes leapt from their tubes at 17-second intervals. Silent messengers of destruction, slicing through the water. The first missed, a ghost passing in the deep. The second struck the Tanakazi near the bridge, a mortal blow. The third found the forward magazine. The result was not an explosion. It was a cataclysm. A concussion so violent it traveled through the water, through the double hull of the Harder, and into the very bones of the men sealed inside. The Tanikaze, a vessel of war just moments before, was now 2 pieces of sinking wreckage, vanishing beneath the waves in less than 3 minutes. The second destroyer, its partner erased from existence, turned instantly. A wounded animal, charging the last known position of its attacker. Depth charges rained down as it came. Dealey took the Harder deep, 400 feet down into the crushing dark. The explosions were titanic hammer blows against the hull, shaking the submarine with terrifying force, but causing no serious damage. For 40 minutes the assault continued. Then, silence. The destroyer, its fury spent, withdrew. 3 destroyers in 3 days. Admiral Toyoda's rage would now curdle into a decision that would alter the course of the entire Battle of the Philippine Sea. But that was a storm yet to break. First, Dealey had one more appointment to keep. He had one more destroyer to sink. And this time, he would do it in the full glare of daylight, with 2 enemy warships watching. The 9th of June, 500 hours. The Harder rose to periscope depth, 12 miles southwest of Tawi-Tawi. The view that filled the lens stole the breath from every man in the conning tower. Dead ahead, not 1, not 2, but 4 Japanese destroyers, steaming in a line abreast formation, actively, aggressively, searching. Their sonar was a physical presence, a high-frequency shriek pinging against the hull, so loud the Harder's sound operator could hear it clearly without his headphones. Dealey had 8 torpedoes remaining, 4 destroyers. The odds were impossible. He would get 1, maybe 2 shots before the pack overwhelmed him. He studied their formation, his mind a cold engine of calculation. The lead destroyer was a blur of motion, zigzagging with frantic energy. But the second ship in the line, the second ship held a steady course, a fatal mistake. A single, unforgivable moment of predictability in the heart of a fleet consumed by a cold, calculated fury. The world, seen through the polished lens of a periscope, is a narrow slice of gray sea and gray sky. A world of immense pressure, of recycled air, of absolute silence. In this world, the hunter waits. For Commander Samuel Dealey, aboard the submarine USS Harder, that slice of gray held his entire focus. It held his target. 6:12 in the morning. A Japanese destroyer turned, cutting a sharp wake, heading directly for their position. The distance closed, 4,000 yards. The men inside the Harder were ghosts, their movements economical, their voices whispers or nothing at all. 3,000 yards, 2,500. Dealey's own heartbeat was the only clock that mattered. At 1,800 yards he gave the order. 3 torpedoes slid from their tubes, silver predators racing through the dark water. The impacts were nearly simultaneous. 3 flashes of light on the DSAT vibrated through the Harder's own hull. The enemy ship did not just explode, it disintegrated. A column of fire, water and twisted metal climbed 300 feet into the air, a funeral pyre against the dawn. In 90 seconds, she was gone, rolled over and swallowed by the sea. The response was immediate. The other 3 destroyers converged on the Harder's last known position, their engines churning the water into a frenzy. Dealey gave the command, "Dive." The Harder plunged into the abyss, 500 feet. The world outside became a crushing, absolute black. Then came the steel rain. Depth charges began to bloom overhead, concussive blasts that hammer. The lights snapped into darkness. For a heartbeat, the submarine was a tomb. Then, the dim, eerie red of emergency lighting flickered on, casting long shadows across the faces of the crew. The hull plates screamed in protest under the immense pressure, a low, metallic groan that spoke of metal stressed to its breaking point. In the forward torpedo room, a pipe burst, spraying a high-pressure jet of seawater across the deck. There was no panic, only silent, disciplined motion. Men moved with a practiced urgency, repairing the damage as the world outside continued to detonate around them. For 2 hours, the hunt continued. 2 hours of unrelenting pressure, of sound and fury. Then, silence. The destroyers withdrew. Dealey cautiously brought the Harder back to periscope depth. The sea was empty. 4 enemy warships sunk in 4 days, a staggering victory. But the commander wasn't counting his successes. He was calculating his losses. Not in men, but in fuel. The Harder had burned through 60% of her diesel reserves. 3 more days, perhaps, before she would be forced to retreat to Fremantle. Hundreds of miles away, the ripples of his actions were reaching the highest levels of the Japanese Imperial Navy. At 1400 hours on June 9th, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the mobile fleet at the Tawi-Tawi anchorage, received the reports. 4 destroyers lost, to a single American submarine. The grim arithmetic was undeniable. If one submarine could slip through his defensive screen with such lethal ease, the entire anchorage, the heart of his fleet, was a death trap. He sent an urgent message to his superior, Admiral Toyota. The mobile fleet had to move. Now. The Americans knew where they were. Toyota agreed. The master plan, Operation Ago, called for the fleet to intercept the American invasion force near the Marianas. But that was not scheduled to begin until June 15th. To move 6 days early was a colossal gamble. His carriers would arrive blind, without proper reconnaissance. His destroyer screens would be scattered. His supply lines, a fragile web across the Pacific, would not be in place. Yet, to remain at Tawi-Tawi with a phantom submarine hunting his ships at will was suicide. On June 10th, at 800 hours, the Japanese mobile fleet steamed out of its anchorage. 4 battleships, 9 carriers, 15 cruisers, 24 destroyers. A steel armada heading northeast toward a battle that would define the war in the Pacific. Within hours, American codebreakers intercepted the movement orders. On the flagship of the Fifth Fleet, Admiral Raymond Spruance adjusted his own vast and intricate battle plans. The enemy's premature departure was an unexpected gift, granting American carriers an extra day to position themselves for the coming storm. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was about to begin, on American terms. Commander Dealey knew none of this. He had no knowledge of the admirals, the broken codes, or the grand strategies he had single-handedly thrown into chaos. His world remained that narrow slice of sea and sky. On June 10th, at 1630, he raised the periscope. 2 more Japanese destroyers were patrolling to the north, moving at high speed, their search patterns aggressive and hungry. For the man who had just altered the course of the war, there was only the cold, simple calculus of the hunt. And there, in the crosshairs, was his next target. In the crushing dark of the Pacific, 5 chances remained. 5 torpedoes. It was all that stood between Commander Samuel Dealey and the abyss. Enough for one final, desperate gamble. At 17:15, a command was given. A shudder ran through the hull of the submarine USS Harder as 3 lances of steel were expelled into the deep. Their target, the lead Japanese destroyer, a gray predator slicing through the waves. One found its mark, striking near the bow. A blossom of fire and steam erupted from the warship's flank. It slowed, wounded, but the sea refused to claim it. The response was immediate and brutal. The second destroyer, a specter of vengeance, turned its bow and charged. 32 knots of raw kinetic fury bearing down on their position. Dealey fired his last 2 torpedoes, a prayer sent into the churning water. Both missed. Silence. The torpedo tubes were empty. The submarine's teeth were gone. Now, they were not the hunter. They were the prey. Dealey's voice cut through the tension, emergency deep. The diving planes bit hard, forcing the submarine's nose down at a terrifying angle. The pressure hull began to groan, a beast in agony as it plunged. 300 feet, 400, 500. The steel coffin descended into a realm of eternal night. The destroyer passed directly overhead. Its massive propellers churned the water into a chaotic vortex, a sound so violent, so close, that the men inside the Harder could hear the individual blades chopping through the sea, a deafening roar that vibrated through the very steel of the hull. It was the sound of their own executioner sharpening his axe. Then, an even more terrifying silence. The destroyer was circling back. Dealey and his crew knew the pattern, a deadly, patient dance. The warship would make pass after pass, seeding the ocean with depth charges, bracketing their position, until the submarine either tore itself apart surfacing or imploded under the weight of the sea. With no torpedoes, there was no way to fight back, no way to make the hunter bleed. Their only option was to endure, to become a ghost in the water and pray their luck and their hull would hold. The first pattern arrived at 17:23. 6 depth charges, a tight constellation of death. The explosions hammered the Harder, rolling the submarine 15 degrees to starboard. Light bulbs shattered, plunging compartments into momentary darkness. Men clung to handholds, their knuckles white, their faces illuminated only by the faint glow of emergency lamps. 2 minutes later, a second pattern, closer this time. The shock waves felt physical, lifting the submarine's stern and slamming it back down with bone-jarring force. Cork insulation, shaken loose from the off mist into the air, the lifeblood of the machine bleeding into the suffocating atmosphere. For 90 minutes, the destroyer hunted them. 90 minutes that stretched into an eternity. 42 depth charges were dropped. 42 thunderclaps that promised a watery grave. Most exploded too shallow or too far away, but 3 were close enough. Close enough to crack the glass on vital gauges and spring minor leaks, cold seawater weeping through the seams of their sanctuary. Dealey held the Harder at 500 feet, creeping along at 2 knots, making the submarine as silent as a tomb. Finally, at 1900 hours, the onslaught stopped. The destroyer, its deadly payload exhausted, withdrew. The hunter had given up the chase. Dealey waited another hour, an hour of strained listening in the crushing silence, before giving the order to surface. They broke through into a world of profound emptiness. No destroyers on the horizon. No patrol planes scarring the sky. just the immense, indifferent darkness of the ocean and the welcome roar of diesel engines desperately recharging the sub's depleted batteries. The Harder, wounded but alive, limped south toward Fremantle. When she arrived on June 26th, after a 17-day patrol, a figure was waiting on the pier. Admiral Charles Loon, firmed Sank. 1 damaged. In just 12 days, Samuel Dealey and the crew of the Harder had executed the single most successful anti-destroyer patrol in the history of submarine warfare. Lockwood awarded Dealey a 4th Navy Cross, right there on the deck. Then he asked the question every commander who cheats death must eventually face. The question that carried the weight of all future battles. When can you do it again? Dealey's answer was immediate, etched in steel and forged in the violence of the deep. "Give me torpedoes," he said, "and I'll sink 10. The crew spent July in Fremantle, the submarine undergoing repairs, its hull being patched, its systems being restored. But something else was happening. New crew members were being trained, drilled by the veterans in the audacious, almost suicidal tactics their commander had perfected. They were learning how to stare down a charging warship and fire straight down its throat. The legend was becoming doctrine. The cycle was preparing to begin anew. In the summer of 1944, a name echoed through the command rooms and briefing halls of the Pacific Fleet: USS Harder. Its patrol reports were not merely read, they were studied, a new doctrine, an aggressive, up-close approach to combat that treated his vessel not as a hidden assassin, but as an underwater brawler. He took the fight to the enemy's teeth. And the tactic worked. Between June and August, American submarines, emboldened by Dealey's success, unleashed a wave of destruction. 14 Japanese destroyers, the guardians of the Imperial Fleet, were sent to the bottom, victims of this audacious new strategy. The legend of the Harder was forged in fire and steel. On the 5th of August, the Harder slipped out from Fremantle, Australia, embarking on her 6th war patrol. This was to be no lone wolf mission. She was the flagship of a 3-submarine pack, operating alongside the USS Harder and USS Hake. At the head of this steel pack was Commander Dealey himself, their designated hunting ground, the vital shipping lanes west of Luzon, the final maritime artery supplying Japanese forces in the Philippines. The patrol began with lethal precision. On August 21st, the wolf pack fell upon a 16-ship convoy off Palawan Bay. It was a perfectly coordinated ambush. In the chaos of torpedo wakes and explosions, 4 cargo ships, totaling 22,000 tons, vanished beneath the waves. The very next day, August 22nd, Harder and Harder located 3 coastal defense vessels off Bataan. There was no escape. All 3 went down. Harder alone was credited with the destruction of 2 frigates, the Matsuwa and the Hiburi. The wolf pack was methodically, brutally strangling the enemy's supply lines. By August 23rd, the Harder, having expended every last one of her torpedoes, withdrew from the hunt. This left Harder and Hake to operate as a pair, prowling the waters off Dassault Bay on the western coast of Luzon. But this string of victories was not going unnoticed. Every triumphant radio signal, every missing merchantman, was a breadcrumb leading back to the hunters. Japanese intelligence was listening, plotting, connecting the dots. They had intercepted the transmissions between the 3 submarines during the Palawan Bay attack. They knew the approximate location of the remaining American vessels, and they had dispatched something special to erase this menace. At 04:53 on the morning of August 24th, the USS Hake submerged 4 miles off Hermanameo Island. Through the periscope, her captain could see the silhouette of the Harder, still on the surface, 4,500 yards to the south. Both submarines were maneuvering into position, preparing to attack a Japanese destroyer that Hado had crippled the day before. Then, a sound. A sound that cut through the ocean's deep hum and chilled the blood of every man in the control room. Echo ranging. The sharp, metallic ping of an active sonar search. Two Japanese escort ships were closing fast on Harder's position. The CD-22 and the minesweeper PB-102. They were moving at 18 knots, not patrolling, but hunting. For 3 days, their sole mission had been to find and kill the American submarines terrorizing Dassault Bay. Aboard the Hake, the captain gave the only order he could: take her deep, run silent. He remained at the periscope, a helpless witness to the unfolding trap. The two Japanese ships were converging directly on his partner. At 0520, Hake's radio operator desperately tried to raise the Harder. A frantic warning sent out into the ether. There was no response, only silence. Either Harder's radio was off, or she was already in the fight. 10 minutes later, at 0530, the Harder began her dive. A crash dive. Dealey must have seen them at the last possible second. The Japanese ships were less than 2,000 yards away. He threw the submarine down, ordering flank speed and a maximum dive angle. The boat plunged at a terrifying 35 degrees. In the desperate haste, her diesel engines were still running as she submerged, churning the sea and leaving a boiling scar on the surface. A fatal signature that pinpointed her exact location for the hunters above. Aboard the CD-22, the sonar operator had a perfect, unwavering contact. He called out the solution, his voice calm, clinical, precise. Range: 1,200 yards. Depth: approximately 200 feet. The legend of the USS Harder, once studied in the safety of briefing rooms across the Pacific, had found its final chapter, written in the cold, dark waters off the coast of Luzon. The first concussion hits without warning, a deep, resonant boom that travels not through the air, but through the very steel of the hull. The boat shudders, a wounded animal in the crushing dark of the abyss. For the men inside, this is the sound they have been trained for, the sound they have dreaded. The hunt is over. They are the prey. Above, on the churning surface of the South China Sea, the captain of the Japanese escort ship CD-22 gives the order: an immediate, merciless depth charge attack. At 5:47 in the morning, his ship makes its first pass directly over the last known position of the submarine Harder. A full pattern of explosives tumbles into the water, armed to detonate at 250 feet. The explosions are perfect. They bracket the submarine, creating a cage of pure kinetic force. At least 3 detonate within 50 feet of her hull. The immense pressure finds a weakness. Near the after torpedo room, the steel skin cracks. Seawater, under tremendous force, screams into the vessel. Within 90 seconds, Harder's stern is completely flooded. The submarine's bow rises sharply, a final, desperate gasp for the sky as the dead weight of her stern drags her down. Commander Samuel Dealey orders all ballast blown. Emergency surface. It is the last command he will ever give. The compressed air systems fight a losing battle against the ocean, roaring against a torrent of incoming water. It is too much. The stern compartments are already gone. The Harder will never reach the surface again. At 5:52, CD-22 makes a second run. This pattern is even closer. The explosions are not just concussions now, they are direct, catastrophic blows. Harder's main pressure hull ruptures in multiple locations. The control room, the nerve center of the submarine, is breached. The sea floods in, shorting out every system. All electrical power fails. The emergency lights flicker once, then die, plunging the crew into absolute, terrifying blackness. 600 feet. Well below her maximum operating depth, the laws of physics deliver the final verdict. The immense, unforgiving pressure of the ocean begins to crush the submarine. Bulkheads implode. Minutes have passed. The USS Harder is gone. At 600 hours, the crews of CD-22 and PB-102 report a successful kill. Their proof floats to the surface. A spreading, iridescent slick of oil, fragments of wood, pieces of cork insulation, the ghost of a warship. For 2 hours, the Japanese ships circle the area, dropping additional depth charges into the wreckage, a brutal final act to ensure their enemy is destroyed. They recover no survivors. All 79 men aboard the Harder are dead. Commander Samuel Dealey, radioman Calvin Bull, who had earned a Bronze Star for his role in the legendary destroyer kills that June. Every officer, every sailor who had helped make the Harder the most feared American submarine in the Pacific. All lost. Her sister submarine, the USS Harder, remains submerged nearby, a helpless witness. Only under the cover of nightfall does her captain dare to surface and file a contact report, a coded, devastating message describing the loss of the Harder. The message reaches Admiral Lockwood at 800 hours on August 25th. He immediately suspends all submarine operations in the Dassol Bay area. He orders every boat to withdraw to safer waters. The news reaches the United States in early September. The Navy Department makes a stark announcement. The USS Harder is presumed lost with all hands. No additional details are provided. In wartime, submarine operations are among the most closely guarded secrets. The American public would not learn the full, heroic story of the Harder's final patrol until after the war had ended. But the Japanese knew. Admiral Toyota received the report on August 26th. The submarine that had terrorized his destroyer fleet for 3 months was finally gone. He ordered a commendation for the crew of CD-22. What Toyota didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend in that moment of victory, was how much damage Dealey had already done. He did not know how 4 days in June had changed everything. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, one of the great turning points of the war, began on June 19, 1944, set in motion by the very submarine whose ghost now lay silent on the ocean floor. 9 days. In the vast emptiness of the Philippine Sea, that is an eternity and a heartbeat. Enough time for the fate of an empire to be sealed, long before the first cannons roared. Here, the largest carrier battle in human history was about to ignite. On one side of the horizon, 15 American carriers under Admiral Spruance, a flotilla of unprecedented power. On the other, 9 carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the pride and final hope of Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet. Above them, the sky was set to become a canvas of fire and steel. 900 American aircraft against 430 Japanese. The engagement would last 2 brutal days. When the smoke cleared, the numbers told a story of annihilation. American pilots, with chilling precision, had torn 376 Japanese aircraft from the sky. They had lost only 30 of their own. In the grim humor of combat, they gave the battle a name: the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Below the carnage in the air, the sea itself was burning. The Japanese carriers Taiho, Shokaku, and Hio were slipping beneath the waves. 2 battleships crippled, a cruiser gone. In 48 hours, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 75% of its carrier air power. a blow from which it would never recover. Yet this historic victory, this one-sided slaughter, was not forged in the heat of that battle. It was the result of a plan that had collapsed, a strategy that had been poisoned at its source. The battle could have gone very, very differently. Admiral Ozawa's original design was one of lethal elegance. His mobile fleet was scheduled to depart its forward anchorage at Tawi-Tawi on June 15th. This timeline was critical. It would have given his long-range reconnaissance planes 4 full days to sweep the ocean, to pinpoint the American fleet's location and composition. His carriers would have been fully provisioned, their munitions magazines filled. His destroyer screens, the sharp teeth that protected his capital ships, would have been perfectly organized. His entire battle plan, a complex symphony of sea and air power, would have been coordinated with land-based aircraft striking from the Philippines. It was a plan designed for a decisive, war-altering victory. But that plan never had a chance to breathe. Instead of departing on schedule, a ghost in the machine forced Admiral Ozawa's hand. He fled Tawi-Tawi 6 days early. That ghost had a name, USS Harder, and its commander, Samuel Dealey, had just conducted a campaign of terror in the very waters the Japanese believed were safe. Ozawa's fleet arrived in the Philippine Sea on June 14th, not as a coiled fist, but as a scattered and desperate convoy. His ships were spread across 200 miles of unforgiving ocean. His reconnaissance aircraft, which had burned through precious fuel reserves during the premature dash from Tawi-Tawi, were now effectively blind. His destroyers, instead of forming an impenetrable shield, were still struggling to regroup from frantic anti-submarine patrols. His vital supply ships were 3 days behind schedule, lagging far behind the warships they were meant to sustain. So when American carrier aircraft finally found Ozawa's fleet on June 19th, they found an enemy in disarray. Japanese carriers were still in the vulnerable process of launching aircraft. Their combat air patrol was undermanned, a flimsy net against a steeled tsunami. The fleet's formation was a chaotic mess. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot happened because Admiral Ozawa wasn't ready. And Ozawa wasn't ready because one American submarine had made his forward base untenable. Dealey and the crew of the Harder had sunk 4 destroyers in 4 days, convincing the Japanese High Command that Tawi-Tawi was a death trap. Admiral Lockwood, the architect of America's submarine war in the Pacific, understood the implications instantly. In his post-war memoirs, he would write that the Harder's 5th Patrol was the single most strategically important submarine operation of the entire war. Sinking 4 destroyers was a tactical victory. It meant 4 fewer escorts protecting Japan's precious carriers. But the true victory was psychological. Forcing the entire mobile fleet to depart early meant the Japanese battle plan had disintegrated before a single shot was fired between the fleets. Between December 1941 and August 1944, American submarines wrote a devastating history across the Pacific, sinking 1,314 enemy ships, a staggering 5.3 million tons of steel sent to the ocean floor. They were merchant vessels, cargo ships, tankers, and troop transports, the lifeblood of an island empire, severed vein by vein. But among that vast tally, only 29 were warships. Most submarine captains actively avoided warships. They were too dangerous, too heavily armed, and, crucially, too fast. But Samuel Dealey was not most captains. He proved that a submarine could be a predator of wolves, not just of sheep. His signature down-the-throat tactic was an act of calculated madness. It worked because it violated every assumption of naval warfare, turning the hunter into the hunted in the blink of an eye. It was this audacity, this willingness to rewrite the rules in the silent depths, that echoed 9 days later across an empty stretch of ocean and decided the fate of the largest naval battle the world had ever seen. In the silent, crushing dark of the Pacific, there were rules, unspoken yet absolute. The destroyer was the wolf, the submarine the sheep. One was the hunter, a creature of speed and violence, built for a single purpose: to find and kill what lurked below. The other was the hunted, a ghost of steel and shadow, whose only defense was stealth, and whose only hope was to run. This was the fundamental law of undersea warfare, a law everyone understood. But one man, Commander Samuel Dealey, saw a flaw in that law. He looked at the predator, at the Japanese destroyer captain, and saw not an invincible warrior, but a man. A man conditioned by routine, by doctrine, by the unwavering expectation that when confronted, a submarine would always, without fail, turn tail and flee into the abyss. Dealey wagered his life, and the lives of his crew, on a single audacious theory: that the greatest weapon was not the torpedo, but the mind of the man who commanded the hunt. He would not run. He would charge. The result was a moment of pure tactical paralysis. For the Japanese captain on the bridge, the world turned upside down. The sonar pings grew frantic, the bearings impossibly steady. The prey was not fleeing, it was attacking. It was coming straight down his throat. In that instant of disbelief, a chasm of indecision opened. Turn left? Turn right? Maintain course and open fire? Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. Every second of training was rendered useless. This hesitation, this fatal pause, lasted on average 12 seconds. 12 seconds. An eternity when a Mark 14 torpedo was closing the distance at 46 knots. It was enough time. It was all the time the USS Harder needed. By the end of the war, the ripple effect of this psychological gambit was staggering. American submarines, employing Dealey's tactics, had rewritten the naval ledger. They had sunk 214 Japanese warships. The pride of the Imperial Fleet, 4 aircraft carriers, vanished beneath the waves. One battleship, its massive guns silenced forever. 9 cruisers, and most telling of all, 38 destroyers. The very wolves that were meant to be invincible, sent to the bottom by the sheep they were hunting. Consider the numbers. Japan began the war with 63 destroyers, and built 49 more during the grueling conflict. Of that total force, American submarines claimed 38, and Commander Dealey's own boat, the Harder, accounted for 4 of them, in 4 days. On March 27, 1946, the war was over. The silence had returned to the Pacific. On the White House lawn, President Harry Truman stood before a woman named Edwina Dealey. He presented her with the Medal of Honor, awarded posthumously to her husband. The citation, read into the quiet afternoon air, captured the essence of his achievement. This remarkable record of 5 vital Japanese destroyers sunk in 5 short-range torpedo attacks attests the valiant fighting spirit of Commander Dealey and his indomitable command. His legacy was cast in steel when the Navy commissioned the USS Dealey in 1954, a destroyer escort that served until 1972. The submarine that started it all, the Harder, received the Presidential Unit Citation for her first 5 war patrols and 6 battle stars for her service. Her motto, "Hit 'em harder," became a legend throughout the submarine force. But her true legacy was the tactical revolution she ignited. Before Dealey, submarine doctrine was a prayer to the gods of stealth. If a destroyer detected you, you ran. You went deep, you rigged for silent running, and you listened to the chilling sound of depth charges exploding around you, hoping the next one wouldn't find you. To engage a destroyer was suicide. The math was simple. They were faster, better armed, and designed from the keel up to kill you. Dealey did not just bend the math, he broke it. Between June and December of 1944, the USS Tang sank 2 destroyers. The USS Trigger sank 1. The USS Barb sank 1 and crippled another. The USS Flasher, using the same down-the-throat attacks, sank 3 escort vessels. The success rate was an astonishing 63%. For every 5 attacks, submarines sank 3 destroyers and damaged 1 more. Only 1 attack in 5 failed completely. The Japanese destroyer captains, of course, adapted. By late 1944, they began to develop counter-tactics, anticipating the charge, breaking the spell of hesitation. The war at sea is a constant, lethal evolution. But for a critical period, one man's insight into human psychology had tipped the balance of power in the Pacific. He understood that the weapon was not the torpedo. It was a question planted in the enemy's mind at the most critical moment. A question that defied all logic, all training, all instinct. And in the 12 seconds it took to find an answer, the war was being won, 1 torpedo at a time, deep in the silent, crushing dark. In the lethal chess match of the Pacific, the rules were supposed to be simple. The destroyer hunts the submarine. The submarine hides, or it dies. But a new, terrifying doctrine was rewriting that ancient law of the sea. A doctrine that demanded the hunted turn and face the hunter. When a submarine charged, the unthinkable happened. The destroyer, the apex predator, would instinctively swerve, turning to avoid a collision. This was the trap. The maneuver was a feint, a calculated dance with death, designed to force the submarine to expose its vulnerable side. As it turned, other destroyers in the wolf pack would have their shot, a clear path for their torpedoes. The hunters had adapted. But the American submariners adapted faster. They embraced the chaos. Instead of turning, they would deliberately slow their speed, letting the enemy torpedoes race harmlessly past their bow. And then they would close the distance. For a ram. The old tactics of evasion were being replaced by a brutal, head-on aggression. The success rate, once a near certainty for the Japanese destroyers, plummeted to just 40%. A deadly gamble, but one that was starting to pay off. The price for this audacity was paid in steel and blood. American submarine losses began to climb. Between August and December of 1944, 9 boats were lost to these ferocious destroyer counterattacks. Some were lost to cruel irony. The USS Tang, on October 24th, was struck and sunk by one of its own torpedoes, a rogue weapon circling back in the dark. The USS Harder, the very architect of this new warfare, went down on August 24th, consumed by the fury it had unleashed. The USS After ran aground just 2 months later, chasing a destroyer into waters too shallow. Yet, for every submarine lost, the enemy was losing far more. The aggressive tactics were working. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Fleet, faced a terrible arithmetic. He could recall his submarines, return to the cautious, defensive tactics of the early war, and preserve his fleet. Or he could accept the grim ledger of higher losses in exchange for completely severing Japan's lifeline, for destroying its convoy system, for starving the empire into submission. He chose aggression. From January to August of 1945, American submarines, operating under this radical new doctrine, waged a campaign of annihilation. 437 Japanese merchant ships were sent to the bottom. 53 warships joined them. By the war's final month, Japan had less than a quarter of the merchant tonnage it had started with. The home islands were starving. Factories fell silent, deprived of raw materials. The once mighty Imperial Japanese Navy was paralyzed, its remaining ships unable to find fuel. The war machine was grinding to a halt. Commander Samuel Dealey, the captain of the Harder, never saw this final victory. He died 3 months after his greatest triumph, killed by the very class of escort ship he had spent a year learning how to hunt and destroy. But his legacy was immortal. His tactics became scripture. Every submarine commander in the Pacific studied the patrol reports of the Harder. Every attack plan referenced the down-the-throat doctrine. Every torpedo solution now included the cold, audacious calculations for charging a destroyer head-on. For 80 years, the sea kept it secret. The final resting place of the Harder and its crew was a mystery, a ghost story whispered among submariners. Then, on May 22, 2024, the silence was broken. An underwater exploration team, led by Tim Taylor and the Lost 52 project, discovered the wreck in the South China Sea. She sits perfectly upright on the seafloor, at a depth of 3,750 feet. A silent monument, 12 miles west of the bay where she made her last dive. Her pressure hull remains almost entirely intact, scarred only by the depth charge damage near the conning tower that sealed her fate. The wreck is a protected war grave. No salvage is permitted. It is a tomb. Finding the Harder was more than locating a lost vessel. It was an act of remembrance. It brought a final, solemn closure to families who had waited 8 decades for an answer. And it was a profound honor for the 79 men who sailed her, the men who forever changed the face of naval warfare. Today, the story of the Harder lives on. At the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, submarine tactics instructors still teach the down-the-throat attack. Not as a maneuver for modern, wire-guided torpedoes that no longer require such desperate, close-range gambles. They teach it as a case study, a lesson in courage, in calculated aggression, and in the sheer, unbreakable will to redefine the very nature of the fight. They teach it to remind a new generation that sometimes the only way forward is straight through the fire. There is a fundamental principle of warfare, as ancient as conflict itself. When your enemy expects you to run, charging often works better than hiding. This was the brutal, audacious creed of Commander Samuel Dealey and the crew of the USS Harder. It was a philosophy that would make them legends, and a gamble that would ultimately cost them everything. In the quiet, climate-controlled archives of the Naval History and Heritage Command, their story lives on, captured in brittle paper and faded ink. Here lie the complete patrol reports, every coded radio message crackling across the Pacific, every meticulous torpedo firing solution, a complex geometry of death, every deafening depth charge attack recorded with clinical precision. For researchers, these documents are more than history. They are the cartography of courage. They allow us to trace, with chilling clarity, exactly how Dealey honed his tactics across 6 relentless war patrols. The reports reveal a commander who learned from every harrowing encounter, who refined his approach with an almost obsessive focus, and who never, ever stopped hunting for ways to send more enemy ships to the bottom. His final resting place is a simple stone in Arlington National Cemetery. Section 59. Grave 874. The headstone lists his rank and his dates of service, and below them a single stark line that tells a story all its own. Medal of Honor, Destroyer Killer. Every year, on the 24th of August, the anniversary of the submarine's final silent dive, the families of her crew gather. They place flowers. They share stories of grandfathers and great-uncles who perished at 22, or 25, or 37. Young men fighting a war that most of them never expected to survive. The 79 souls aboard the Harder were a portrait of a nation. They came from 38 different states. Farm boys from Iowa, their hands more accustomed to a plow than a periscope. Factory workers from Michigan, who had traded the assembly line for the claustrophobic confines of a submarine. College graduates from California, who put their futures on hold for a war they believed in. They all volunteered for submarine duty, knowing the appalling casualty rates. 32% of all submariners who served in the Second World War never came home, the highest loss rate of any branch of the American military. They knew the odds. They served anyway.
Calvin Bull, the radio man who earned a Bronze Star for his role in sinking 5 destroyers in a single patrol, was just 24 years old when he died. John Mora, one of the few who survived the war after serving on the Harder, spent the next 50 years of his life telling their story, ensuring their sacrifice was not forgotten. He became an admiral, a keeper of the flame, and passed away in 2010 at the age of 90. The last living link to that legendary crew, Paul Bryce, died in 2022 at the age of 98. With his death, the silence became absolute. No one who served aboard the Harder remains to tell their story firsthand. And that is why these archives, these stories, matter so profoundly. The men of the Harder left behind a paper trail, patrol reports, radio logs, Medal of Honor citations. But those documents are the skeleton of the truth. They cannot convey the flesh and blood of the experience. They cannot make yent purpose. They cannot replicate the gut-wrenching terror of hearing depth charges exploding overhead, each blast a hammer blow against the fragile shell separating you from the crushing abyss. They cannot place you on that conning tower, watching your captain make a split-second decision that meant life or death for every single man aboard. The official history tells us the USS Harder sank 4 destroyers in 4 days, a feat that borders on the unbelievable. It does not, it cannot tell us about the fear, the bone-deep exhaustion, the absolute leaden certainty that this patrol might be your last. Their story is a testament to a simple, terrifying principle. When the world expects you to retreat into the depths and hide, sometimes the only path to victory, the only path to immortality, is to charge straight ahead. Deep beneath the waves, where light surrenders to pressure, a steel hull holds the final silence of 79 men. Their vessel, the USS Harder, became a tomb, and their commander, Samuel Dealey, a legend sealed in the abyss. History is filled with such stories, echoes of courage that threaten to fade with each passing generation. Silence is the second death, the slow erasure of sacrifice. But for a story to live, it must be heard. It requires a witness. By bearing witness, we defy the quiet dark. We ensure that the names and deeds of these men are not consigned to dusty archives or the ocean floor. Their memory becomes a living thing, a chronicle passed from one mind to another, a permanent refusal to forget.